Yes, a very good morning to you. It's the final day of July, Friday, the 31st of July, and it's the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff that you tuned into. My name's Pete Fairbairn. I'm your host, and I'm joined by Julian de Stoop. How are you, Jules?
I'm not too bad, Pete. How you going?
Mate, I'm going okay. There's plenty happening in the world of sport. Another huge weekend of fixtures across all the different competitions. So we're going to fire straight into it with five of the biggest stories making waves this morning. And we're going to start with a great article from Richard Hines over at the ABC. And he so rightfully shines the spotlight on the fact that women's sport is finally back on our screens this weekend and not a moment too soon. The resumption of the Super Netball season, which brings with it, and he's a little bit facetious here, but brings with it the novelty value of the controversial two-point shot. We've talked about that previously on the show, but also an important reminder that women can hub too. Of course, the Sunshine Coast, home to the Super Netball competition. We've seen the AFLW competition, obviously, that was cancelled right at the height of the first COVID outbreak during their final series. T20 Women's World Cup, they managed to get that away, but only just. But really, we haven't seen a lot of elite women's sport taking place down here in Australia, particularly over the last few months. The Olympic Games being postponed, which is, of course, an opportunity to shine the spotlight on some of Australia's top female athletes. Ash Barty says that she's not likely to go and play at the US Open, so we don't get to see the world number one in action there. But in general, we've got women's sport back this weekend with the Super Netball. Jules, how important is it for the country that we do have elite level female sport back this weekend?
Yeah, it's huge, Pete. And I think because women's sport in this country, it's really been riding a wave of momentum for a few years now, and rightly so. We've seen the increased spotlight on all sorts of forms of women's sport. Obviously the last big event we had in Australia with women's sport was the Cricket World Cup final, which was unbelievable. The AFLW as well. And unfortunately, you mentioned the Olympic Games there, which is a real shame because around the world now, I mean, it's our women athletes that are really flying the flag across all sorts of different sports. A lot of them are Olympic sports, some aren't. And unfortunately, we're not going to get to see them on the big stage this year. So, yeah, I think it's really important because it's great for the young girls around the country to be seeing their idols on the television again. And, Super Netball is a fantastic competition. Like a lot of other competitions, it's been compromised and there's hubs and all these sorts of things. But it will be great to see it on the TV screens, again this weekend. Look, thankfully, we did get the Women's World Cup in just in time. It was very disappointing to see the AFLW suspended when it was, but at least we got most of that season away. We should be resuming, fingers crossed, resuming next year. So, yeah, I think it's really, really important it's back on the screens, and it starts with Super Netball this weekend.
And I think one point I would make is that perhaps the biggest news in Australian sport over the last couple of months has been the successful bid for the Women's World Cup in 2023. And the number of Matildas players who have transferred to big overseas clubs over the last month is a real one to watch as well. That's going to give them the best possible opportunity to continue to develop their game and position the Matildas as a genuine threat to take home a home World Cup. So, plenty of excitement there and great to see the Super Netball back. We're going to go from Super Netball down to Melbourne and the AFL, an article by Michael Gleeson in The Age. Really interesting article ahead of Essendon's clash with the Brisbane Lions tonight, looking at the evolution of Zach Merrett's role at Essendon this year. Of course, last year he was a vice-captain of the football club and actually led the team in half a dozen matches. This year, no longer in the leadership group at all. Last year, he was purely an inside player, an accumulator possession-wise, and a player that the opposition often tagged. This year has, again, evolved his game to be a bit more inside-outside. We've seen Andrew McGrath, we've seen Darcy Parish as well, rotating through that midfield group a little bit more, which frees Merrett up to play a different role. Can you talk me through, as somebody who follows the club closely, just how important that shift has been in Merrett's role on-field and off-field in Essendon's strong start to 2020?
Yeah, look, as he acknowledges in the article, he was pretty disappointed to go from vice-captain and, as you say, leading the team in several matches last year to being out of the leadership group 6 months later. That was a big hit for Zach Merrett, and I think credit to him. He's put his head down and I don't think he's back to his best form. Around 27, I know he won the best and fairest last year, but 2017, he looked like he was going to take off and be one of the elite midfielders in the competition. I think he did stagnate a little bit the last 2 years. But I think, as you mentioned there, I think the slight shift in his role is twofold. It's been good for him. And, Dylan Shield is probably the player now that does get tagged in the opposition if they choose to tag an Essendon player. But I think just as importantly, it's allowed Andrew McGrath to go in there and be an inside midfielder, which is basically what he was drafted to do, but he's developed on the wing and across the back line. And Darcy Parish is exactly the same. A lot of frustration with Essendon supporters. He hasn't spent more time on the ball, which is what he's suited to do. But I think Merrett's been really important. Without Heppel there, in a couple of really close games this year, the Sydney game, and also last week, he stood up and was the best player on the ground. So I think it's mentally refreshed him a bit as well, not getting tagged, not playing inside as often. But a big night for the Bombers tonight. I mean, they were poor against the good side, the Bulldogs, a couple of weeks ago. They're 5-2, but apart from Collingwood, they haven't beaten anyone. And they play a really good side tonight, Brisbane. Once again, they've got some injuries, but the Lions have got some injuries as well. So big night for the Bombers to not necessarily have to win, but they have to play well against a good side to prove that they can be a finalist this year.
Really interested to have a look, and I dare say that you have seen him playing at VFL level, but really interested to have a look at Sam Draper, who makes his AFL debut tonight for Essendon in the ruck. A young man who's yet to play in the competition, but has a 4-year deal, I believe, and was the target of a number of other clubs in search of a ruckman.
Yeah, look, big raps on him. Unfortunately, he did his knee last year pretty much just as he was about to make his senior debut. So, look, he's the player the Bombers expect to be their number one ruckman for the next decade. And a lot of talent, played some good VFL footy, so it's great to see him get an opportunity tonight.
Staying with the AFL and having a look at last night's result, Melbourne Demons absolutely demolished by Port Adelaide at the Gabba, going down by 9 goals. Melbourne great Garry Lyon hasn't held back. He's lashed out at the misfiring Demons, as per an article from Glenn McFarlane in the Herald Sun today. He's labelled them pathetic, embarrassing, shambolic. He said that the heat should rightly come on coach Simon Goodwin this week after the team only kicked 4 goals for the game. It was embarrassing. There's no other way to look at it. Port Adelaide was clinical. Melbourne was pathetic. They've got to own it. It was insipid. For what it's worth, Goodwin apologised to fans after the game, said it was the most disappointing performance this season, and did say it was unacceptable. I was at the game. Melbourne seemed to lack any drive from the kickoff, really. There seemed to be a bit of a void of leadership. They looked heavy in the legs. Where to for this Melbourne team? They're either rocks or diamonds, as a friend messaged me last night. And how much heat should really be on Simon Goodwin?
Look, there's heat on him, and there should be. There's not heat in terms of his position. I mean, he's contracted until the end of 2022. And in this current environment, no club is going to sack a coach and pay him out for 2 years. So Simon Goodwin is not going anywhere in terms of his job position. But certainly there is pressure, because I think a lot of Melbourne's problems the last couple of years has been their method. They look like a rabbit in the headlights at times. They don't know whether to play fast. They don't know to play slow. And you see a team like Richmond, who've got significant talent out. It happened last year as well. But they've got a method that stands up, where Melbourne at the moment, they don't really have any key injuries compared to a lot of teams around the competition. But I think last night was a different problem. It was just their intensity, their effort. You could see 5 minutes into the game what was going to happen. I think Simon Goodwin mentioned after the game, Port scored 8 of their 12 goals from defence. So they basically went coast to coast for 75% of their goals. So that shows that the intensity wasn't there. Look, but it's not all the coach's fault. I mean, you're a Melbourne man. What's happened to Tom McDonald? What's happened to Angus Brayshaw? 2 players that were absolute keys in their finals run a couple of years ago have completely fallen off the cliff in terms of players. So some individuals have got to take some responsibility. But it was great stuff to watch Garry Lyon on Fox Footy last night. It was raw, it was emotional, but it wasn't a rant. And he put up some good reasons as well. But just so disappointing last night, because the previous 3 weeks had been pretty good. 2 wins, a spirited loss against Brisbane. I think we're all looking forward to see how they go against a good Port Adelaide side. But it's a bit of a cliche, but they just didn't come to play. So, yeah, no doubt Alistair Clarkson's been the one under the pump. But this week there's going to be, there's games every night, which means the focus probably shifts pretty quickly, which is a good thing for Simon Goodwin, but he will be under some pressure this week.
And you would imagine if Melbourne were to go to Adelaide next week and not get a good result against the Crows, currently winless, we know they might get off the mark this weekend against North. But if the Dees were to go down against the Crows next weekend, that pressure would only intensify. To your point, I genuinely believe a lot of what's happening with a Tom McDonald, with an Angus Brasher is between the ears. There's a real lack of confidence in a number of these Melbourne players. There's a lack of intensity and commitment to the contest at times. Christian Salem, I've never seen him play a worse game. That's going to happen sometimes. Some of the kicking from Max Gawn and Clayton Oliver, they're inside their own heads. They know they're not great kicks of the footy, but that has been something that Melbourne as a team has been able to, to get around in years gone by. But at the moment, there's a real lack of penetration there. And, you wonder why you bring a guy like Adam Tomlinson in on a decent contract to marshal the wings and to help stop that coast-to-coast rebound that so many Port Adelaide goals came from, and they're not playing. But anyway, I could talk about that all day. We will continue to watch that one with interest, but we're going to move to the NRL and an article from Brent Reid in The Australian, which says that the NRL and the players are still more than $20 million apart as they haggle over the future. That's basically when we look at the gap between the respective financial expectations for what's left this season and the following 2 years. When we look at the salary cap, we look at squad sizes, and we look at the money that the NRL wants to be able to give to the clubs to keep them up and running. It's clear there's plenty of work to do here, despite talk that Peter V'landys and the NRL wanted to have the game's financial future resolved by the end of July. That timeline's looking now to have been a pretty ambitious one. You don't blame V'landys because pretty much everything he said he was going to do, he has. He hasn't been able to meet the deadline, though. The parties are still some distance apart. And just quickly before I move to you, we saw the Broncos release their half-year forecast yesterday, announcing that their profit was poised to drop by more than $1 million. They're one of the richest clubs in the land in any code. If that's happening with them, you can't help but wonder how Cronulla Sharks or West Tigers, some of these other clubs are faring. Jules, are we going to see some of these NRL clubs go completely under? And quickly as well, what responsibility do the players have to take to ensure that doesn't happen? Or do they need to look out for their own best interests and looking after themselves and feeding their families as well?
Yeah, when I read that about the Broncos, the first thing I thought is every other NRL club would love to be in that position where they're still making a profit. Look, I don't know enough about the intimate financial details of the NRL clubs, but no doubt if you compare it to the sustainability of some AFL clubs, it's more precarious for rugby league. There's certainly some teams that are in some trouble. Look, I think the easy thing to do, and it happened at the AFL at the start of the year when they were talking about salaries and how much of a cut they would take, is to say, players are being greedy. But I think it's a bit more complicated than that. To a degree, they've got to look out for themselves, and they're all playing, we've seen with the AFL players, they're certainly playing on reduced wages this year, which is really tough on the players that are in the lower paid players in the competition. But in saying that, the greater good has got to be the focus right now. I mean, without a game, they're not getting paid. And without their club, they're not getting paid. So I think there's a responsibility right now to get the deal done as quick as possible. If there has to be some short-term sacrifice, that is just the way it's got to be. So it never looks good when there's a squabble between the league and the players over money, and it particularly doesn't look good right now. So it's Peter V'landys has ticked most of the boxes, as you say, and he'll be desperate to get this one ticked ASAP.
Salary caps and squad size is something that, of course, we're following in all the sports at the moment. And one of the articles we spoke about yesterday with Darren Parkin was Robert Craddock in the Courier Mail talking about maybe instead of expanding in the NRL, they want to have another team up here in Brisbane. Maybe one of the teams who are struggling financially in Sydney could be relocated. They will never, ever have a better opportunity to do that than they currently will. Our final story today, some really good news for the A-League, something to celebrate there. With the new team that's entering the competition next year, Macarthur FC, announcing the signature of former Socceroos captain Mark Milligan yesterday. He's been over in England with Southend United. He's played 80 times for the Socceroos. Yes, he's towards the end of his career, but he's one of the more recognisable players in Australian football, and certainly somebody who is recognised by fans outside of that real dedicated A-League bubble. Yep. They also announced the signing of Adam Federici, the goalkeeper who's spent the last close to 2 decades in England. Yep. Premier League experience, a wonderful goalkeeper, many, many years with Reading. Some real positives there for Macarthur FC with a couple of big-name signings and some real hope for a league that needed a bit of a shot in the arm.
Yeah, absolutely. 2 good names there, as you say, both towards the end of their career. But I think it's important in a way that general football fans and sporting fans will know who they are. That's important. And we've seen with Western United this year that they've made some really good signings, more international players, Bessa Berisha and Diamanti from the Italian, and they're playing really good football. So, when a new club starts, you want them to be competitive straight away. They've got two good leaders there. And the A-League's resumption, there's been some pretty good football played. I mean, Sydney's been almost unbeatable. They were knocked off by Newcastle. Didn't see the game last night, but it sounded like an absolute cracker between Adelaide and Perth. 8 goals, Adelaide winning 5-3. But look, it's a really tough time, isn't it, to be a new club in a competition. So it's a challenge for MacArthur, but to sign 2 great professionals, 2 well-known players, it's a pretty good start.
Yeah, absolutely. Great news for the A-League there. Jules, it's been great to catch up this morning. Before I let you go, I know we're running out of time, but I've got to grab you one to watch for the weekend.
Well, I reckon 2 of the big premiership favourites in the AFL have been so impressive so far this week, haven't they? Richmond put the Dogs to the sword without 6 or 7 key players. Port last night. So I'm looking forward to see what West Coast can do against Geelong, potentially another contender on Saturday night. The Eagles were unbelievable last week. If they do it again and play like that, wow, they're going to be probably premiership favourites by the end of the weekend. So that should be a cracker in Perth. Big test for Geelong, but if the Eagles can play like they did last week, it's going to be fun to watch.
Absolutely. Well said, Jules. Fantastic to catch up with you as always. Look forward to catching up again next week. You've been watching the best On Ground Weekday Kickoff. Of course, you can get the show via all your favourite podcast apps and also on Facebook and YouTube. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.